Hello everyone. Today's case is actually one that surprised me with how eager police were to solve it, and how much coverage it has considering the circumstances. It's truly refreshing to see so much care towards a case for someone who is living a high-risk lifestyle. And it's honestly how all cases should be. We've talked quite a lot on my channel about cases involving people that are homeless, who have addictions, who are involved in sex work. And sadly, normally those cases don't get a lot of coverage. But as I said, this case is a bit different. The Nighttime podcast also did some amazing interviews with the people involved in this case, so I definitely recommend checking those out if you want to get a deeper dive into this case. I'll have it linked down below. But the most important thing I want you to take away from this video today is not only about the missing woman, but that people who are struggling also deserve to be found. Their families still deserve answers. Emily Bailey was born in December of 1998 to her mother, Lori Bevan, having 4 siblings and being the second youngest. She grew up in Hamilton, Ontario, a city 45 minutes south of Toronto, and seemed to have moved around a lot growing up. Her family moved between East and Central Hamilton. She attended multiple different schools and would even live in Brampton for a few years. Emily was described as being full of personality, outgoing. She had a good heart, a great sense of humor. When she was younger, she was also very close with her mother and brother Ben. However, as she grew into a teenager, things started to change. Everything adding up in her life, Emily began to struggle with depression. She ended up hanging out with an unfavorable group of friends at school. And from there, she began to struggle with substance abuse and homelessness. When Emily was around 19 years old, she got pregnant with her first daughter. And this gave her a reason to get clean, and she did for a while, but after she gave birth, she eventually fell back into it. When her daughter Harper was around 4.5 months old, her mother Lori took over raising her. But Emily was always very involved in her daughter's life despite that. There were so many videos and photos of Emily with her children, and they look happy. But despite that, there still seemed to be some turmoil between Emily and her family. This would all happen a second time when Emily once again fell pregnant, but this time with a man named Brandon Hunter. Their daughter Kinsley would live with her for a while until Emily ended up experiencing homelessness once again, and then Kinsley would go live with Brandon's mother. And Emily's relationship with Brandon wasn't the greatest at the time, it seemed, and he would eventually get arrested for unknown charges as well. However, when he ended up serving his time and getting out on house arrest, he realized Emily was actually living in a tent at this time, and they ended up rekindling their friendship and they turned into best friends. Now, I think we can all agree, Emily clearly wasn't living a lifestyle that was appropriate for young children to thrive in, which is why they ended up living with their grandmothers. And from all accounts, Emily was an extremely good mother besides that. She was always very attentive with the children. She was always around and trying to go see them. And it also seemed like she was very determined to turn her life around and get her kids back. She started making plans to get clean, to find a job, and eventually reintegrate herself into her daughter's lives permanently. Her mother, Lori, actually ended up having a conversation with her, telling Emily that, she got her life together and she could prove that she had stability, that she could eventually work towards getting Harper back. And Lori said there was nothing set in stone to say that Emily couldn't take care of Harper and have her. But it seemed like every time Emily would take 2 steps forward, she would take 1 step back. Emily would end up frequenting a local bar and befriending a bartender named Nikki, who would end up becoming her unofficial aunt. Nikki said that if Emily wasn't living in the tent, she spent 90% of her time at Nikki's home, hanging out, watching TV, eating with her. At the time, Nikki said that Emily was dating a man who was physically abusive to her, and she was scared for Emily's safety. By the fall of 2021, Emily had broken up with that man, and she eventually began dating another man by the name of Jeffrey Johnson, who actually turned out to be Nikki's brother-in-law. The relationship, however, didn't seem to be going the smoothest. It seemed to be described as more of a sexual relationship, and Emily was kind of staying there since she had nowhere else to go, and that was kind of just her home base at the time. Friends described the relationship as rocky, and it didn't exactly seem like Emily wanted to be there forever. She wanted to go back to school, she wanted to get a job and turn her life around. But Nikki says that Emily's substance abuse wasn't as bad as people think it was. She said that Emily would go days without using, she would eventually use again, go days again without using. It was described as if it wasn't something she was taking all day long, every day long, that she couldn't function. Her life didn't seem to revolve around substance abuse, but she was still using and it was still an issue, clearly. Sometime in November would be the last time that Lori would see her daughter Emily again after a falling out. Lori saying that she would have really loved for Emily to maybe even move back in with her or something, but she knew that Emily had fallen back into using substances, and that was something she did not want in her home. She did not want around the kids, which is honestly understandable. That isn't something that young kids should be around. And as a responsible guardian of Emily's child, that was, I'm sure a very hard decision to make and a hard thing to have to talk about with Emily, to be like, you're my child, I want to bring you in, but, your daughter's life is going to be at risk because of that, or her safety, or just even showing her a role model like that isn't the greatest, But things were getting even more complicated for Emily, because Brandon claims that Emily would end up texting him on November 24th claiming she was pregnant, which would have meant that she was pregnant with Jeffrey's child. But the conversation seemed to go more towards her wanting to terminate the pregnancy because her and Jeffrey were very on and off. It was a very rocky relationship, and it just didn't seem like the best option. Her brother Ben also said that Emily confided in him quite a lot about her struggles and about her substance abuse issues. And he said that he felt like Emily was very ashamed of her substance abuse issues, and so she would hide it from the family and friends. But around this time, in late November, December kind of time, it seems like Emily also told her brother Ben that she had just gotten a job and that she wanted to go to counseling for her addictions. But it seems like after Emily met Jeffrey, things started to change, and she started to change and act differently. She wasn't interacting with her friends and family as much, and by December, she completely stopped posting on her social media altogether, which was very out of character for her, because Emily was always very talkative, very friendly, and very outgoing despite, her struggles and her issues and her depression. And she was also very, very active on social media. She posted tons of TikToks, she would post on Facebook, Instagram, she was just all over. But all of that stopped out of nowhere, which is very concerning, and in my opinion could be a red flag. Especially red flags when it comes to DV. We do often see in DV that someone will not be allowed to talk to family and friends anymore. They will get more withdrawn. They will stop communicating with people. And it seems like posting on social media may be another kind of similar aspect of that. And it makes me wonder if there was something like that going on, considering the claims of how rocky the relationship was. On top of that, it makes me wonder, we're going to talk about more about substance abuse and stuff like that within the relationship there seemed to be. Could that have also been affecting it? Could Jeffrey have been a negative influence on Emily and been escalating that kind of abuse? And could substances have been causing her to also further pull back because she was ashamed of it? But Emily still was somewhat talking to her brother Ben and her friend Nikki. And around Christmas time, Emily ended up messaging Ben about what Christmas presents they would be getting for their siblings and just discussing Christmas presents, which is, a typical conversation you'd have with a sibling. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary, nothing seemed to be wrong. Around December 24th, Emily was reported to be at Nikki's home to celebrate her birthday. And again, nothing seemed out of the ordinary with Emily. A couple days later, she again met up with Nikki, and Nikki helped dye her hair. They went out for dinner. It just seemed to be like a normal day. However, a few days later, things would take a turn on New Year's Eve. Around 1:01 p.m. that day, Emily would end up texting a friend named Erica Tooley who lived in Toronto saying, and I quote, "Yo, do you got a driver?" End quote. She also would message Brandon something similar, saying, and I quote, "I needed to do some running around or someone just to drive. They'll get paid, obviously." End quote. And when he didn't respond right away, she said, and I quote, "Bro, there's a time limit. I'm not fucking around." End quote. I'm pretty sure from Brandon's interview, he did end up messaging her back. However, Brandon was on house arrest, so it's not like he could have went and driven somewhere. Emily then tried to video call Erica about half an hour later. However, Erica didn't answer the call. Brandon would later say that Emily asking to borrow a vehicle was kind of an odd request because Jeffrey had his own truck, he had his own vehicle there, so there shouldn't have been a reason for them to have to borrow someone else's. But all of this made me wonder what was so important that they needed to borrow a vehicle with such a time constraint and that the person driving was going to get paid. I was trying to play devil's advocate with it, thinking, okay, maybe they needed to go get groceries or something like that, and they wanted to be courteous and pay the person that would take them there. But then I listened to Brandon's interview with Nighttime Podcast, and he said that at that time, Emily was trying to sell things to make money, and claimed that Jeffrey would often steal things from stores and then resell them. He said one time Emily had called him, she was sitting in the car, and Jeffrey was inside of a store, like a gas station or something, stealing stuff, and Emily was basically waiting in the car for him to come back. So Brandon basically alluded that he thought that was a reason that Emily may have needed a vehicle so that they could go steal things to make some money. Later that night, Emily and Jeffrey would end up stopping at Nikki's house for around 25 minutes. Jeffrey spoke to his brother while they were there, and Nikki ended up wishing Emily a Happy New Year's. The pair ended up mentioning that they were invited to go to a party later, but they weren't sure if they were going to go. Emily more so seemed to want to just stay home and have some drinks alone with Jeffrey. She didn't seem to want to be up to going to a big party and hanging out with a bunch of people that night. Police saying, and I quote, "Emily was to attend a party, but it's unclear if there even was one." End quote. Nikki would later provide police with video surveillance footage that proved that Emily and Jeffrey were at the home that night for that allotted period of time. And she would also end up providing them with footage from as far back as October all the way to January 10th. But Emily leaving the home that night was the last time that Nikki would ever see her friend again. According to what a cab driver would later tell police, he dropped Jeffrey and Emily off at a residence on Weir Street North near Barton Street East, and this house is thought to have been Jeffrey's home, which is in that area. Around 2:36 a.m., Brandon would end up messaging Emily via Facebook Messenger, wishing her a Happy New Year's. And it showed that Emily opened the message, however, she would never respond to it. It's thought that Emily was last seen alive around 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. on January 1st of 2022 in the area of Weir Street. Police would be told that Emily had left during that time to go to a friend's home. However, if that statement is true, she never made it to the home. But from what I found, it seems to be her boyfriend, Jeffrey. That was the last person to have ever seen Emily alive, besides that cab driver, and previous to that, Nikki and her boyfriend. There would be later allegations that Jeffrey and Emily had actually had a fight that morning and Emily had stormed out of the house. But if that is true, Jeffrey wasn't the one to report her missing, especially after she didn't come home for days and days and days. Emily actually wouldn't be reported missing for a week and a half after she was last seen alive, and only after she missed a scheduled meeting with her daughter Kinsley. And this was an even bigger red flag than just normal, because Emily actually would try to get extra days to see her daughters. She would always be calling Brandon's mother and asking her if she could come see her early or see her an extra day. But when Emily was completely radio silent and then also missed the actual day she was meant to see Kinsley with no heads up, no word, nothing, and then no one could contact her after that, that is when everyone began to worry, especially her ex-boyfriend Brandon. Because as I said, after Brandon got out of jail, him and Emily actually ended up rekindling things in a way. Like, they were really good friends. They FaceTimed all the time. They were always talking. And it would be Brandon who would end up going around, messaging people, calling her friends, trying to figure out where Emily was and what happened to her. And when he realized no one had heard from Emily for over a week at this point, that is when he went ahead and called the police. Emily wasn't reported missing until January 10th of 2022. 9 to 10 days after she was last seen alive. Despite her issues, Emily had always been in constant communication with her friends and family, or at least some of them, leading up to her disappearance. As we talked about, before December, she was even more active, and then things kind of started slipping away. She stopped talking as much, she stopped posting on social media and communicating with people as much. But as you could see from what we talked about, she was still talking to people. She was messaging with Brandon, she messaged her brother, she was hanging out with her friend Nikki. And according to Nikki, when Emily was around, she always seemed happy. But when you look at things she was posting on social media, it kind of seemed the opposite. But when you consider all of that, and now she is completely dropped off the face of the earth, that is very concerning. Things would get even sketchier when police would end up showing up at Jeffrey's home to search for Emily, because Jeffrey here refused to let police in, claiming he had COVID and was recovering from hand surgery after injuring his hand while sharpening a chainsaw around January 2nd or 3rd, which I also seen Nikki confirm this in her interview with Nighttime Podcast. But because of this, police weren't allowed to come in and search his residence right away. Now, eventually, it seems like police were thankfully able to get a search warrant for Jeffrey's home, and they seem to have conducted 2 searches on Jeffrey's properties, one being the home that Emily was living in, and a second being a milling property in the Dunnville, Ontario area. However, no evidence was reported to have been found. And I want to clarify, Nikki seems to not be fond of Jeffrey whatsoever. However, she did seem to kind of corroborate that he hurt his hand sharpening a chainsaw while doing work of some sort, maybe on that milling property. Let me know down below if you know more information on that. But I actually don't know if she was there when he hurt his hand. From what it seems like, he came to her complaining his hand was infected, and she looked at it and told him he needs to, go to the hospital and get that checked out. So it makes me wonder, is there any corroboration of how he actually injured his hand? Searches were also conducted around this time regarding records as well as electronic devices. But these so-called friends of Emily's, a lot of them that no one really knows much about, including her boyfriend, it kind of seems, were grouped into this, were all uncooperative with police, in one way or another. Which, when you're mixing drugs into all of that, people usually don't want to talk to police anyways. And because of all of this, because of these people that Emily was associating with, it took 3 weeks to get a description of what she was even wearing the last time she was seen. Lori saying that these friends of Emily's weren't people that she would have wanted to associate herself with, meaning they didn't seem to be the greatest bunch. Again, I think it's really important to note that Emily's ex-boyfriend Brandon seemed to be a rock in her life. Again, he was the one who reported her missing and figured all of this out despite being on house arrest. And you can see in interviews that he's done, especially on the news, he is very emotional and he's very active in Emily's case and trying to find her.
I am a mess. I need my daughter back.
And wherever she is, just please come home. We love you, miss you.
Friends and family of 23-year-old Emily Bailey gathered today to post flyers across the city. They say she was last seen in the area of Barton and Kenilworth on January 2nd.
This is very out of character. I know. she would get in contact to see her daughters. These babies mean everything to her.
She's never done anything like this before. She's an amazing mother.
Brandon Hunter and Emily share a child together, 22-month-old Kinsley. Emily has another daughter, Harper, who is 3. The girls are currently living with their grandparents.
She runs around on her toy phone. That's to say she's talking to mommy. Her sister Harper looked at me the other day and said, "Please just bring my mommy home." And it's so difficult. It's the hardest thing I've had to deal with.
Harper has been crying a lot for mommy, asking for, she knows something's going on.
Those heartbroken tears seen today. Emily's family says they noticed something was wrong when she stopped posting online.
She'll post on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, and she'll post her on social media, and she has not been on social media for quite some time now.
The last TikTok she posted was from December 12th.
Her last TikTok, I had a feeling something was up, and normally Emily posts happy TikToks. Normally, on Facebook, she'll be posting all the time, and recently she hasn't been.
You know, he says that this is the mother of his child. Like, he loves this woman. Despite, them not being together, he has a love for her, and you could clearly see it. And it's, kind of amazing that they became best friends after all of that. That doesn't happen with a lot of people, especially if you have an emotional and a physical relationship with someone, you have a child with that person, and then you break up, you're not really together, and then they came back together after all of that. It's a very unique and rare thing, I think. So much so that Brandon would admit to later breaking his house arrest so that he could drive all the way from Scarborough, where he was living, to Hamilton to confront Jeffrey, because he wanted to know what happened that night. Now, according to Brandon, he claims when he arrived at Jeffrey's home, Jeffrey was extremely high. He doesn't know on what substance, but he claims that he seemed to be very high. His eyes were showing it. The way he was acting was showing it. But Jeffrey wasn't combative with him or anything like that. He let him come inside his home. He also began to ask Jeffrey, again, what happened that night? What was his story? And that is where the allegations come in about Emily and Jeffrey having a fight that night and her leaving the house. Brandon is the one that got that out of him, allegedly. Only 2 months into Emily's disappearance in March of 2022, police would announce that based off of evidence, they believed that Emily had been murdered and her body disposed of in an unknown location. So her case ended up being moved over to Hamilton Police Services homicide unit. However, what the evidence is that led police to this conclusion has not been revealed. Police saying, and I quote, "Since investigators have been unable to locate her body, this suggests steps were taken to conceal it. The location of Emily's remains are unknown." End quote.
Reported missing to the Hamilton Police Service on January 10th of this year, when her friends and family couldn't get in contact with her. She's not been seen or heard from since that time, and we're aware that her last activity was in the end of December 2021, when she was reported to be attending a New Year's Eve party. Prior to and after that party, she was reported to have been leaving an acquaintance's house. Both the police and her family are concerned for her well-being. Emily is a mother of 2 young daughters, and this is much out of her character. It's not something that we would normally expect from Emily. At this time, the Hamilton Police Service homicide investigators have taken over the search for Emily, and we believe the circumstances surrounding her disappearance have indicated the possibility of foul play. We believe there's individuals in our community that are aware and have information related to her disappearance, and Emily's family deserves answers, and we are encouraging those people to come forward.
This isn't like her. She is always with her family, always worried about her children, stays in contact with us, maybe not all the time, but we hear from her. I know somebody knows something, and somebody needs to come forward and tell somebody, please. We need to know what happened, answers, anything. Just for our sake and her girls, her little girls. We just really need her back. We love and miss her so much, and we need her back, and these girls do too.
Police did come out around this time, though, and say they had a vehicle of interest in mind. And they were looking for information regarding a dark or black GMC or Chevrolet pickup truck that Emily had been connected to a week before her disappearance, which this car on the screen right now isn't one that was directly used in the case, but it's something similar. But what's very strange about that is guess who owned a dark pickup truck matching that description? Jeffrey Johnson, whose truck was actually impounded in November of 2021, and then it seems like he was borrowing his brother's truck, which Nikki says was very similar in description to Jeffrey's truck still. However, according to Nikki, who has seen the photos of this truck in interest apparently, which I could not find online. I wish I could. If you have, let me know down below where you found it. But this truck, according to Nikki, that is actually of interest is quite rusted, and she claims that both Jeffrey and Jeffrey's brother's trucks are like more brand new. They're not rusted the way this truck is that they're looking for. So it's just very odd that he's the last person to see her alive, allegedly. He owns a truck that the police are looking for, and his story's a little, he also didn't report her missing, which is very odd to me. Things are just kind of rolling down the hill towards Jeffrey here. It's just all, unfortunately, very coincidental, or maybe something, On top of that, to make Jeffrey look even less great, he would later be arrested and put in jail over a previous DV assault charge regarding his ex-girlfriend, an ex-girlfriend that Emily actually knew. Brandon claiming that Jeffrey, and I quote, beat his ex so badly one time with a plastic chainsaw that he thought he killed her, end quote. Not seeming like the best guy. By April of 2022, people were actively trying to connect the disappearance of 33-year-old Stacey Raspberry from the Niagara region, who was last seen in February of that year. But police quickly dispelled this rumor, saying that Emily and Stacey's cases had nothing in common. Because people at the time were like freaking out. There were all these rumors going around that Emily and Stacey were killed by a serial killer who was killing tattooed women. But police say there is no evidence to connect these cases. So it's apparently not the same. Now, something very strange would end up happening in May of 2023. A picture of a dog would end up being posted on Emily's TikTok with the song Cupid by 50/50 playing over it. Remember, Emily hadn't even been active on social media right before she disappeared. And then after that, she disappears. No one's heard or seen from her, and she hasn't been active anywhere for over a year. And then all of a sudden, something's posted on her TikTok. That is so strange. Her mother, Lori, saying, and I quote, I felt really numb and thought, who would do that? I was at work and all of a sudden I had to go home because I was shaking, end quote. Now, police believe that it wasn't actually Emily who posted on her TikTok. They believe someone actually hacked her account and posted it, which is just absolutely an awful thing to do. Whether they knew Emily was missing or not, like to hack someone's account is just very annoying and disrespectful. But the fact that this happened to someone who is missing, so now family especially is freaking out, thinking, oh my God, is she out there somewhere? Is she trying to communicate with us? But no, apparently police believe that it was just someone that hacked her account, which, considering she hasn't been active anywhere, hasn't used her bank accounts, nothing like that, like she's literally dropped off the face of the earth, it's highly unlikely she decided, if she was out there hiding off grid somewhere, to pull out her phone and post a TikTok. Like it doesn't make sense. By this point, over 30 witnesses have been interviewed, multiple search warrants have been executed, and multiple searches have been conducted within the limits of Hamilton and exceeding them. A request for financial records was made back in 2023. However, I didn't see any update on that. However, just from what the public can see, police don't seem to be any closer to figuring out what happened to Emily. But I feel like they have a lot more information than we know. When it comes to theories, I think there's an obvious one that everyone looks at, which is that Jeffrey had something to do with this. I mean, when you combine everything that we've talked about, DV against an ex-girlfriend, that their relationship seemed to be very rocky. It seems like, according to Brandon, Jeffrey was on drugs. There's claims that Emily was on drugs. That can be an awful combination. Then on top of that, Brandon claims that Emily admitted to him that she was pregnant. And despite all of this, she seemed to have been trying to want to better her life. I mean, is there a possibility that she brought up being pregnant to Jeffrey and he freaked out or something? Could he have been extremely high and violent and done something to her? Considering he has this violent history of DV, it seems, especially if what he did to his ex-girlfriend is true. That is completely horrifying. But the biggest red flag to me out of all of that is that he didn't report her missing, that it had to be her ex-boyfriend that did. I mean, if we want to play devil's advocate and look at everything, because that's always the smartest thing to do, is to look at all areas, not just hone in on one thing and get obsessed with one thing. I mean, there's always a chance that Emily did end up leaving Jeffrey's home and going to a friend's where maybe she OD'd on something and the people freaked out and covered her body up, which would make a lot of sense why evidence wouldn't be found in Jeffrey's home then. There's a possibility that she OD'd in Jeffrey's home, but he moved her body right away, and so there's no evidence of that. I mean, we have to remember, Nikki said that Emily wasn't a hardcore drug user, but you don't have to be a hardcore drug user to OD. All it takes is one time, one wrong hit of something, taking something that even has maybe fentanyl in it. All it can take is one time. It could be your first time. It could be your 20th time. So I think there's a possibility, considering that substances were being used, that something like that could have happened. Then there's always the idea that maybe she did get picked up by someone in this dark truck that isn't anyone that anyone knows, and she was met by foul play. An individual with bad intentions that maybe she had met somewhere one time and she had nowhere else she felt she could go for some reason, even though I feel like she could have went to Nikki's house, it seems. But again, with such little information, it's really hard to say. Again, I think police have a lot more than they're saying in this case. It's one of those cases where I feel like there's a lot more that we don't know, especially for the fact that just 2 months after her disappearance, they were already moving her case to the homicide department, yet haven't announced what they found. In my opinion, they had to have found something very important to have moved it to the homicide department, whether that be some kind of evidence, blood, DNA, something that made them think for sure that Emily is not alive anymore. Cases don't just get transferred like that unless there is some kind of evidence. And in my opinion, they clearly have something, they just can't prove anything yet. And they also can't find her body. Emily's friend, Erica Tooley, saying, and I quote, "She was really trying to get her shit together. She was really determined to get back custody of her kids and her life back on track. She was doing everything possible to do that. I really wish she just had the chance." End quote.
We're not going to stop until she's found her. We get answers. Regardless of what I have to do, if it's the last thing I do.
I just need you home, Emily. Somebody needs to just let us know. We need her home. Your babies miss you.
And despite her struggles, Emily did have friends and family that loved her. She had 2 daughters that are now permanently without a mother. And like her friend said, Emily will never now get the chance at recovery and turning her life around and experiencing all the things she wanted to experience. She was so young. She was in her early 20s and she already had 2 daughters. She had a very hard life. She was struggling with a lot of things, it seemed, yet she never got the opportunity to change that. And it really truly seemed like she had the drive to. And someone out there took that away from her, and they are still walking our streets right now to this day. This case is very new compared to some of the cases that I covered. And that person is most likely still alive, walking the streets just 45 minutes away from me right now. And that is terrifying. Lori saying, and I quote, "Last year when the older daughter started daycare, Emily couldn't come. She said, I can't be there today, but I'll be there next year when she starts school. And that's been the hardest thing for me. She's not there for anything, and we don't have answers." End quote. Take a good look at Emily one more time, just in case there is a chance she is somewhere out there. Or maybe you have some surveillance footage you can look back on and see if you've seen her there, or maybe you will recognize her from somewhere. Emily was last seen wearing a yellow Billabong brand hoodie with a long black winter coat. She was also carrying a light blue backpack with black handles. She is described as a white female standing 5'3" to 5'4", weighing around 100 to 134 pounds, with shoulder-length black-brown hair with green highlights and brown eyes. She has a tattoo of an elephant on her left forearm and a Batman symbol on the outside of her right forearm. There's currently a $20,000 reward from the Hamilton Police leading to information to find Emily. If you have any information on Emily's disappearance or where she may be or what happened to her, please contact the appropriate authorities. I'll have them down below. My heart goes out to Emily's family, her daughters, her friends. As I said, this case is very important because a lot of times cases like this don't get covered. Thankfully, this is a case that has got quite a bit of coverage, but I want to continue to spread the word on it. I think the more eyes on it, the better, especially me being someone who lives quite close by to where this happened. And I just covered a case from Hamilton where a lot of people said they didn't know about the case. So I'm hoping all of my new followers from Hamilton will see this and maybe someone out there has an answer or has information. Someone out there knows what happened to Emily. It's just a matter of time for that person to either slip up or evidence to be found that leads to their arrest. As always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.